When I first published my review for Plague Tale Innocence back in January of last year, that was supposed to be preparation for my review for Plague Tale Requiem. Instead, here I am more than a year and a half later, finally getting around to it. But better late than never, right? Plague Tale Requiem is a continuation of the first game that primarily follows Amicia and Hugo, a sister and brother duo. Amicia has become Hugo's protector and tries to constantly find a way to help her brother, who is plagued by a supernatural disease known as the macula that racks his body but also causes plagues of rats to appear and infect the local surroundings. The game itself plays as a stealth action game since Amicia isn't really a fighter, at least not in the traditional sense. Instead, she needs to use her wits, tools, and environment to get the jump on her enemies or sneak by them if she can. Getting caught is not an option for Amicia, although Requiem is a bit more forgiving than its predecessor. The game was an absolute treat to play with satisfying gameplay and an emotional, intense narrative that had me gripped until the end. I try to avoid major spoilers up until when I talk about the last bits of the story, but if you don't want even minor spoilers, then you've been warned. If you're watching solely to decide if it's worth it, then yes, it's absolutely worth it. However, if you want to hear more or have already played, then without further ado, let's get started.
Goodness! I got so scared!
The game picks up where Innocence ended. It's been 6 months since Hugo's fight with the Grand Inquisitor Vitalis, and the party has been on the road ever since to meet up with the mysterious organization of alchemists known only as the Order. Amicia and Hugo make their obvious returns as the main protagonists, along with Lucas, the apprentice alchemist and close friend who helped the duo out in the first game, and Amicia and Hugo's mother, Beatrice, who they saved near the end of Innocence. Their time on the road seems to have been rather peaceful, but of course that wasn't meant to be when Amicia and Hugo explore some nearby castle ruins. They come across some angry beekeepers who are just killing people.
Hey!
What's going on?
How many of you are there?
Wait! We didn't mean to trespass. We fell here by accident. We'll leave if you show us how.
Lies!
I swear! I don't know what's happening here, but we have nothing to do with it.
Lies! You bloody thieves! I'll cut you to pieces!
And I don't think the game ever really explains why. I kept wondering when we'd get an explanation for what was going on there, but it never came. Instead, they simply act as a catalyst to get events in motion. Amicia and Hugo try to escape, and it's here where the game teaches you the ropes or reacquaints you with basic sneaking mechanics. Stay in the tall grass to hide from the enemies, and throw pots or use environment to distract guards so you could sneak past. Amicia does have her trusty sling, but it wasn't really necessary for this section. Actually, I'm not even sure if you could use it to get past these guys. Regardless, you do get caught and things are looking really bad for Amicia when Hugo loses it. We don't know exactly what happened because it cuts to black, but given that we knew Hugo could control rats at the end of Innocence, I think we have a pretty good guess. Hugo blacks out and wakes up on the shore of some island. He follows a large red bird which leads him to a tree standing by a pool of water amidst a field of flowers. Things take a turn for the worse as Hugo is hit with a sudden wave of pain from the macula, the mysterious disease that he's had ever since birth. It's not until he limps his way over to the pool that he realizes the water is healing him. As he attempts to thank the bird for leading him there, he wakes up. The dream becomes a point of hope for Hugo and eventually Amicia, but also creates a wedge between Amicia and their mother as to what should be done for Hugo. But before all that drama, they reach their destination, only known as the Red City, which is an Order headquarters and can supposedly help Hugo.
Water! You saved me. Thank you.
The game by this point already had impressive visuals with the previous fields and rolling hills, and it remains visually consistent throughout. I loved every new area the game took me to, from those fields to medieval cityscapes to the coast. Both buildings lived in or long-lost ruins felt detailed and real to me. Much of the game felt more vibrant compared to the last one, which I thought was a welcome change. The cities are where the game's aesthetics and graphical capabilities really shine though. Both of the cities, the Red City and the town on the island of Lacuna, are filled with a ton of detail. As I said in my review of the first game, it seems pretty clear they did their research and used a lot of medieval building references to construct the architecture in the game. This helped make them feel believable to the environments they were in, whether inspired from areas in southern France or the Mediterranean island life for Lacuna. However, it was the life in each of these urban areas that really impressed me. There were people doing all kinds of things. I mean, sure, there technically were celebrations going on in both of the towns that Amicia and Hugo passed through, so there was reason for all the hustle and bustle. But it was a good excuse. There were people running shops, eating, playing instruments, dancing, working on crafts, etc. It reminded me a lot of walking through towns in Assassin's Creed, especially newer titles. I love seeing stuff like this as it makes a place feel alive. It makes me wonder what Asobo Studios could do if they had the budget and wanted to make a historical open world game. That said, they do have a section in the game that is more open than anything like it previously in the series. It was liberating being let off the rails to explore since, typically, Plague Tale is a fairly linear affair.
What do you think it was?
I don't know, but it woke me up.
There, the house.
A bad omen, I tell ya.
Curfew is still in effect! Go back to your homes!
What's going on? Tell us the truth.
Enough lies.
No, run! All of you!
Additionally, you can't really talk about the graphics in a Plague Tale game without talking about the rats, and just the sheer number of them. They are an ever-present threat throughout the games, and their numbers are legion, especially in Plague Tale Requiem. In Innocence, the game could have up to 5,000 rats on screen at once, whereas in Requiem, that number increases to a staggering 300,000 rats. Yeah, 300,000. That's insane, but I can believe it with some of the moments that take place in the game. There were genuine, oh shit, moments that I had when playing this game, and the devs' ability to dial up the crazy factor did a lot to show just how much of a threat a bunch of rats could be. While the rats are always a major problem for the protagonist, there are plenty of actual human threats that also pose a problem. And Amicia is the one to handle it every time. While she may voice qualms about killing people, she certainly has no problem doing it when push comes to shove, and even relishes in the combat at times when her anger gets the better of her.
They're nothing to be scared of.
Amicia, what are you doing? We have to go!
No, I'm tired of being afraid. I'll show them that it's over. Come, I'll give you what you want.
It's clear that this constant pressure put on her, either from others or her own desire to not fail Hugo, causes her to crack at the seams. She suffers from PTSD, and it's even showcased in the form of panic attacks and mental breakdowns. The stress builds, causing her to be angry, tired, and unfortunately these emotions rub off onto Hugo. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Suffice to say, Amicia is not in a good place. However, with all this violence in her life, it translates over well to a young woman who is no stranger to fighting with everything she's got. And this shows in the gameplay. Amicia is not your typical warrior and instead has a variety of tools to get the job done. And that's only saying if she actually goes and kills everyone she sees. There are set moments where a fight is inevitable, but I think in many situations you could sneak your way through. Although it's probably more likely you'll do a variety of sneaking and killing. My preference was to always just kill everyone in my way if I could. I found it easier to do that, especially once you get a hold of the crossbow. Getting that final upgrade that let you recover bolts from people you've killed was really powerful. Along with her iconic sling and the new crossbow, Amicia also has a variety of alchemical solutions that could help her get past obstacles, create distractions, or kill enemies. However, all that said, you never really wanted to let anyone catch you. But it is more forgiving than in Innocence. Now, Amicia can perform a counter with her sling to briefly stun enemies to get away from them, and on that note, many of the areas felt larger than in Innocence, which allowed for things like breaking line of sight so you could hide and resume sneaking. Alternatively, Amicia also has a knife that could be used as a way to sneak kill someone, or as another counter that kills the enemy rather than stunning. I think these were good ways to reduce frustration and also believable given Amicia's experiences and how she would be more capable in a fight compared to the last game. Some other changes that I really liked over Innocence was that we no longer needed to hunt for rocks for sling ammunition. The crossbow, on the other hand, was quite limited at the start, with a max of only 2 shots, but it made up for it by being able to take out guys who wore helmets. Additionally, alchemical solutions could be thrown by hand, by sling, or now loaded into pots as a sort of grenade. And to switch between these 3 delivery methods was very intuitive with the controls. I think it made things more tactical by making me think things like, do I need some area of effect? Well, I probably should use a pot. Do I need to be quiet? I should toss this then because the sling would draw attention. I think I could have used the alchemical mixes more to my advantage, but I did find myself using the trusty sling or crossbow most of the time. On that note, there are 3 skill lines that can improve throughout the game, being Prudence, Opportunism, and Aggressive. These lines improve based on how you complete each encounter. By the end of the game, I had easily maxed out Aggressive since that was my go-to method for dealing with enemies. Prudence is improved through being sneaky, and Opportunism improves through utilization of alchemy. I thought it was a neat system that could encourage players to play differently, especially in a New Game Plus, to try and max out the skills they didn't manage to do in their first run. And while I mention Amicia being the powerhouse, we can't forget Hugo as well. Despite him being with Amicia most of the game, he doesn't always have access to using the rats, but there are several sections where he does, and it's quite powerful. One big change is that now when Hugo controls the rats, the viewpoint changes to the perspective of the rats, making the act of using them even more visceral than in Innocence. Hugo even mentions a change in how he controls them now that stems from the macula growing inside him.
You controlled them like before?
Not like before. This time, I was inside their head.
Careful. They must not take control of you. The macula wants to take you over, feed on your emotions. You have to be very careful.
I will.
The rats are still very satisfying to use, even if it does hurt Hugo now. He has a stress meter that if pushed too much, causes him to lose control of the rats, and he passes out for a bit. Additionally, when he's in that mode, and the player is controlling the rats, other enemies can still come across Amicia and Hugo sitting in the same spot, which could be dangerous. So you have to choose when are the right moments to use the rats. However, I think the most useful thing that Hugo's control of the rats gives the player is the ability to see enemy outlines wherever they are up to a certain radius. I use this far more than the rats to set up shots or gauge whether I should walk around a corner or not, and it didn't do that much to raise the stress, so it was a win-win. Although Amicia is quite capable, especially alongside Hugo's rats, they're not alone during much of their journey. Similar to the first game, there are several characters that assist them along the way. However, Requiem opts to have less secondary characters in favor of allowing them to have more time in the narrative. Lucas is their ever stalwart companion who's been with Amicia and Hugo almost right from the start. He didn't have much he could do last time other than give Amicia new alchemy recipes at certain points in the story. While he still does that here, he also can provide distractions or get out of tight situations. And he's just a straight up good friend who sticks with Amicia and Hugo through thick and thin. I like Lucas.
I don't know what's happening to me, Lucas. I feel my mind going.
Yes, because this world hurts. And it keeps hurting. And you want to hurt it back. But it's a fight you cannot win, Amicia. You are not them. You are a Darun.
The newcomers are Arnaud and Sophia. While they don't go into either one of these characters that deep, it's enough that you can get a sense of who they are and why you should care. Arnaud is a grizzled war veteran who's seen a lot and has a beef with the Count of Provence over the death of Arnaud's son. Sophia is this cool smuggler captain who's lived much of her life on the seas, working with shady dealings and people. Both of them are sweet on Hugo, and it's pretty easy to like both of them, even if Arnaud and Amicia's relationship is a bit prickly. Although, he did try to kill her after all.
Last lesson. If you want to be reckless, be better than that.
That said, Sophia has quite a bit more time with the pair than Arnaud, and it's pretty easy to see why they decided to give her a prequel game. Personally, I'm hoping we get to see a bit more of Arnaud in that game as well. Anyway, I like their abilities that they lended to the player to get past obstacles. Arnaud was fairly straightforward in that he's a fighter. It did make my kill everyone I see approach a lot easier. There was one moment where you could use his shield as a torch to get past rats, which was neat, but only used for that one specific moment. Sophia, on the other hand, has a mirror she uses to create distractions by burning dry brush to attract the attention of enemies, and she can also use it to reflect light sources to create a makeshift torch that fends off the rats. Like the first game, these characters weren't always around, so it's not like you always had access to their abilities, but they were nice in the moment and helped add extra elements to an already expansive arsenal of tools. And this brings me to the point where I say, if you don't want things really spoiled for you, then don't watch any further. The rest I want to touch on are the final chapters of the game's story. If you're just looking to see whether or not it's worth it, then hopefully this helped you. But before I continue, if you're enjoying the video or found it helpful, then please consider giving this video a like and subscribing for more video game coverage in the future in the form of reviews and first impressions. And if you're feeling extra generous, then you can buy me a hot beverage via YouTube Super Thanks, or consider joining my YouTube membership. Every little bit goes a long way in helping improve the channel. Also, as a partner with Instant Gaming, you could use my affiliate link to get this game or any others, and that gives me a small kickback, which also helps support the channel. For those who don't know, Instant Gaming is a digital marketplace that sells discounted games. If you're looking specifically for Plague Tale Requiem, as of this writing, they currently have it for 73% off. Additionally, they run a monthly giveaway where you could potentially win this game or any game available on their website, which I assume also includes any newly released titles as well. To participate, you could use my giveaway link below. Thank you immensely for checking out either of those links, and double thank you if you decide to use the affiliate link. Okay, now let's get back to the video. Amicia and Hugo do eventually reach the island of Lacuna, the place from Hugo's dreams. Instead of a magical cure, they learn about more history of the Order and a previous carrier and his protector known as Basilius and Ilia. Amicia believes this revelation is the key to helping Hugo, whereas he sees his dream as a lie and there is no hope for him. There is only more destruction here, as is evident by the Order's actions with locking up Basilius as they feared his power. As someone who is a father of a 6-year-old, it was quite painful to see Hugo feel like there's no way for him to be free of the violence, and of the macula. I suppose it's the shedding of childlike innocence by realizing that there isn't always a tied-up neat ending, but obviously, he's way too young to have to be broken down like that. You just want Hugo to get his win. Despite Hugo's pleas to just take it easy and enjoy what life he can, Amicia is determined to find the truth in her desperate hope for a way to help her brother. Her motives are well placed, however, this continual pushing, especially on such a young child, causes Hugo's own loss of control when placed under stressful situations, especially the life or death kind. Hugo sees how his sister deals with these situations and how she also lacks control. When told that he shouldn't be killing people, Hugo questions Amicia's logic as she does it all the time.
I wanted to save them!
Hugo, you don't kill people just like that!
Why? You do it all the time!
Because
And I can kill quicker than you!
you don't attack people by yourself! You listen to me and do as I say. Is that clear?
I don't care! They're all dead now anyway!
Hugo!
What the hell?
She desperately wants to preserve what innocence he has left, but it seems that only violence can get them through. To that end, Hugo continually taps into his power, pushing him closer and closer to each threshold of the macula until it reaches a point of no return. I felt this was quite apparent when their mother is killed at the hands of a crazy cult leader. Hugo and Amicia are both witness to this, and Hugo responds by calling forth tons of rats to kill everyone in sight. Amicia is right there goading him along to kill the soldiers and the woman responsible for the mother's death. It's obviously a very emotionally charged moment, but in the end, it seems apparent that no good will come from any of this. In the short term, the island town on Lacuna is completely destroyed, with rats seemingly killing most people. The protagonists flee the island in Sophia's boat in the hope that they can live a peaceful life away from all of this death and let Hugo live away from the stress that triggers his episodes. However, that's not to be, as the Count is upset that they killed his wife, the lady responsible for Beatrice's, their mother's, death. He caught up to them in his own ship, and he seems to have completely lost it as well. I mean, well, I guess that's fair considering the love of his life is dead. Anyway, he has plans to use Hugo to bring about a new world order. Yeah, don't think that's gonna go as planned. In the fight, Amicia gets shot by an arrow, and Hugo assumes she's dead. Luckily, this isn't the case, but Hugo doesn't know that since he gets knocked unconscious and taken by the Count. Amicia wakes up on the shore with Arnaud. When they try to meet up with Sophia and Lucas, they are met with the Count.
We'll get him back.
The words of a true knight, Arnaud!
No.
Really, I've never seen anything like you.
Where's my brother, you bastard?
Safely in my possession. Until he's ready to serve. Until he sees your head in a rag. And knows this old world must burn.
Bastard!
Personally, I think this is where the story rushed a bit too much. I'm supposed to believe that at that time the Count already took Hugo to Marseille, which admittedly is pretty close, and then they found the wrecked ship. Not to mention, his whole purpose for finding them is so he can make sure Amicia is dead, so that Hugo will follow his command, which, once again, that's a stretch in logic that doesn't seem to add up, but he's not thinking straight. But anyway, if that was the case, why did he have Sophia and Lucas tied up in the first place? Seems killing them would have made more sense. Regardless, a fight ensues, which also happens to be the toughest fight in the game. And for good reason, as it's the last fight of the game. I had to retry several times on normal difficulty. During the fight, an explosion happens with Marseille as the epicenter. A cloud of gray covers the land, signaling that Hugo has crossed the final threshold. The fight quickly comes to a finish as Arnaud sacrifices himself to allow Amicia the final shot on the Count. But no one has time to mourn, as they need to get to Hugo.
It's the right time. And you gave me quite the last run. He's a great boy. And you.
I know.
You.
After making their way through hundreds of thousands of rats, literally, Amicia and Lucas find themselves closing in on Hugo. Lucas describes this spherical structure that Hugo and the macula have made as the nebula. This marks the final threshold, and within this area, all natural laws stop. Actually, an interesting thing to point out that I guess I didn't really realize until this game is that the macula seems to have some type of sentience. In the first game, Amicia and Lucas feel that the macula might know what they were doing and trying to stop it. However, I always assumed it had just been a feeling rather than something concrete. Whereas in Requiem, the macula seems to have a mind of its own, as it was the one that planted the dream in Hugo's mind and lured him to Lacuna. I assumed to have him merge with the massive nest that was underneath the island, and perhaps achieve the final threshold there. However, at that time, Hugo still had enough of his facilities and Amicia to pull him back from the brink. Without her, or anyone for that matter, he only had himself, and he let the macula take him. As Amicia steps over the precipice into the nebula's aurora, she loses Lucas and is walking through a bleak landscape until she comes across a statue of a bird. The bird being the phoenix that Hugo originally saw in his dream. She starts hearing Hugo and assumes that in order to find him, she needs to follow the birds. However, Hugo tells her that her insistence to keep fighting and to keep doing the same things is not working, so she needs to stop following what she thinks is the right path. Once past the bird statues, she sees a sea of rats pouring out of these giant skull-like heads, with her desperately trying to fight off the rats. Hugo again says that this isn't the way, and sometimes you need to realize when to give up. You can't win every fight.
It's us or them! I have no choice!
You have a choice, but it scares you. There are too many, Amicia.
I don't care!
But I do. And it hurts to see you fight like that.
Like what?
Like before. And each battle mattered.
They still matter! They do!
Amicia finally understands and lets the rats take her. When she comes to, she's met with Hugo. She believes she could still get him out of there, but what the weird nebula-induced vision shows her is every person Hugo comes near dies. Essentially signaling that, for Hugo, it's too late. He even says as much that the macula and him are one and can no longer be separated.
Playing tricks.
I am the macula now. I am.
What? No.
You knew it could happen. It's too late.
No.
I let the macula take all of me. Now this is what happens.
I know.
So there's only one course of action left. Amicia needs to kill Hugo to end this destruction before it eventually consumes the world. I think for many players, they probably saw the writing on the wall a long time ago. Hugo was more than likely doomed to die. Master Vodan back in the Red City seemed to think so, although he was an Order stooge who didn't truly understand the macula but actually feared it. However, even the lie in the form of the dream was perpetuated by the very thing they were trying to stop. If that's not damning, I don't know what is. However, for me, it definitely was the fact that Hugo essentially resigned himself to death, in a way realizing that if he could experience some good things in life, then that was enough, simply because he didn't want to cause anyone else pain.
You know, it's not important if I die.
What? What are you talking about?
The Magister Vodan told me I'm going to die.
God, no, Hugo, I'm so sorry. It won't happen.
Don't be sad. I'm happy to be here. This boat is the best, and I like Sophia. And Anna, even if you don't like him.
All of this was Hugo's way of getting Amicia and the player to accept his fate and understand the delusion that he could be saved if she just continued fighting for it. At least, not by this point. Their unfortunate circumstances had led them to this, and the constant hardship in their life spurred the macula ever forward. In the end, it's sad, but such is the way of life sometimes. Now, I mentioned there are no different endings, but that's not entirely true. If Amicia deliberates too long, Lucas will step in and take the shot with his crossbow. This creates a rift between the two of them. Amicia will understand why Lucas needed to do that, but at the same time be unable to be around him given that she only sees him killing her brother. However, the canon ending, in my mind anyway, is that Amicia comes to this acceptance, however reluctantly, and ends Hugo to stop the plague. The game ends with the 1 year later epilogue. Amicia had been living in the mountains for some time in the house that they were going to take Hugo to after reuniting with their mother and Lucas. She's alone but is soon met with Sophia. They talk for a bit and we find out that Lucas is on the road studying, and Amicia has decided that she wants to try and look for signs of the new carrier so that she could help them and their protector. Before she rides off with Sophia to her boat, she goes off the path some ways to a clearing with stone pillars and a cairn that she made for Hugo. She came there to say goodbye, although it's clear that she's not over Hugo's death, which is probably something you could never really get over. She states that she will never forget Hugo's sacrifice for the world and that she won't let it be forgotten. Again, such a heartbreaking state of affairs. I really wanted to see Hugo get his win, but it wasn't meant to be. While Amicia was a victim in all this as well, I can't help but feel that Hugo's proximity to Amicia when she couldn't control herself definitely contributed to how it all ultimately ended for Hugo. Obviously, it can't be said that it was her fault for his eventual giving in to the macula, because that wouldn't be fair or even accurate. However, I think one of the important messages that I took away from playing Plague Tale Requiem was the importance of letting individuals process their emotions in a healthy manner, and that it's okay to reach out for emotional support. Amicia always seemed to bottle it up and push it out of the way. To be fair, there never seemed like there was a lot of downtime to come to terms with the anger and fear she felt inside of her. In the end, this erupted into bouts of anger and lashing out at anyone who got in their way, or crippling fear and panic at what was going on around her. In turn, this spilled over to Hugo, who was an impressionable kid and started dealing with problems in a similar manner. But in her attempt to move on, Amicia adopts a new purpose to aid the new carrier and protector, which gives her the drive to carry on, and hopefully a way to help where she may have failed in the past. If you played Plague Tale Requiem, then let me know your thoughts about it in the comments below. If you haven't, then let me know if my thoughts want to make you try the game, or maybe they actually made you want to stay away. And of course, if you have any questions for me, then leave them down below as well. I hope this video helped you in some small way, and if it did, then please consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, or whatever it is you feel like doing. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.